dear students. So let's start with the rapid revision of pharmacology. I am Dr. Deepika Tikku, your pharmacology educator. So now we're going to do the topic of general pharmacology, and under that we're going to study pharmacokinetics. So let's move on and start with certain PYQs, and then we will go deep into that concept. So the first PYQ is, which of the following best represents the extent of drug absorption? Your options are Tmax, area under the curve, Cmax, or half-life, that is T half. So before we jump on to answering this question, so let's first get into the concepts, and then again we'll come back and answer this. So this is the graph which shows you the plasma concentration versus time graph. And as you know, when the drug is given to the patient, so drug is going to get first absorbed into the systemic circulation. And this is how we get this graph. And this is actually a bell-shaped graph, right? So as the drug is entering into the systemic circulation and it is getting absorbed, so there'll be a point here when that the concentration of the drug will reach its peak. And this is a term which is we call as the Cmax, right? And the time which is taken to achieve this maximum concentration, this is called as your Tmax. So after the peak has been achieved, after that, there is distribution and there is, the elimination actually takes place. So therefore, the graph is going down. Now, the whole area which this curve is going to cover, that is called as this area under the curve, right? This is your area under the curve. Now, what is the significance of these parameters that we discussed? So Cmax just tells you the maximum plasma concentration that the drug has achieved. And how fast that maximum plasma concentration has been achieved, that is known as your Tmax, time taken to achieve that plasma concentration. So in some cases, it can be achieved faster. In some cases, it can be achieved slow. So what is this? This is actually nothing but the rate of absorption, right? So this is the rate of absorption. Now coming to the third term, which is the area under curve. So this whole area under curve tells you how much the drug has been absorbed. So in other words, we can write it as the extent of absorption, right? So this is the extent of absorption. So area under curve tells you about the extent of absorption. Tmax tells you about the rate of absorption. And these two are the most frequently asked terms in the exams. And we have to remember Tmax is for rate and AUC is for the extent of absorption. Now this area under curve is also called as the bioavailability, right? So this is also termed as the bioavailability. And what is bioavailability? Is the fraction of the administered dose of the drug that reaches the systemic circulation in the unchanged form. So that is called as bioavailability, and this depends upon the absorption of the drug, right? And how to calculate bioavailability? There's a formula also for bioavailability. So how will you calculate bioavailability? So let's see here. We have a drug and it can be given by two routes. So one is your oral route. So the drug is going to go into the plasma slowly, achieve its maximum concentration, and then this concentration is going to go down. So this is by the oral route. So this is the time. This is the plasma concentration. And this is the curve that we get. Now, secondly, what we can do is we give the drug by the intravenous route. So as soon as you give the drug by the intravenous route, what happens? You're giving directly into the veins or directly into the systemic circulation. It doesn't need to get absorbed. So the graph can be some because achieves the plasma concentration immediately. So the graph will be somewhat like this. So this is the same drug, but when it is given by the IV route. So now when we have to calculate the area under curve or the bioavailability, so how do we do? So we calculate the area under curve by the oral route. We calculate the area under curve by the IV route. So the formula F represents bioavailability. This is equal to area under curve by the oral route divided by area under curve by the IV route, and in percentage you can multiply it by 100. So whatever answer you will get, it will be in percentage. So because IV ka standard, it is a standard gold standard where it has the maximum bioavailability. So we take it here in the denominator. So this is the formula that you should know, what is the bioavailability of a drug. So this is the important thing. Now, if we go back here, and the question was, what does the extent of absorption, which will represent the extent of absorption? So if we see here, I told you what is representing the extent of absorption, that is your area under curve. So here the correct answer would be B, that is your area under curve, right? What about the other options? Cmax is just tells you the maximum plasma concentration. Tmax, I told you, tells about the rate of absorption, not the extent. And half-life or T-half is the time taken by the drug for the plasma concentration to reach its 50%. So that is half-life or T-half. So nothing to do with the rate or extent of absorption, right? Okay. So moving on to our next question is, select the correct options regarding the route of administration and its bioavailability. So please read that. First you have to see what is the route given and then bioavailability. So you have 4 options being given, like IV is equal to 1, that is bioavailability is 1. Oral, the bioavailability is somewhere between 0.75 to 1. Intramuscular, again between 0.75 to less than equal to 1. And subcutaneous, 0.75 to less than equal to 1. So which of them are correct? So there are multiple choice answers. So whether it is ABD, ACD, A and C and A and D. Again, we go first understand what is happening here and then we come back to this MCQ to solve it. So see, now route of administration is the important ones. We should know the bioavailability. I told you bioavailability is nothing but the fraction of the drug which has which has reached the systemic circulation in the unchanged form. So if you talk about IV route, so IV route, what is happening? The drug is directly entering into the systemic circulation. So there is no loss anywhere, right? Especially if you give by oral route, the drug, there will be some loss in the GIT and the drug has to then pass into the this first pass metabolism, has to go to the liver to undergo first pass metabolism and then it reaches the systemic circulation. So there will be a fair amount of loss of the drug. So this is your GIT, right? And there is, the blood supply, let's say here, and this here we draw the liver, right? So the drug, this is the portal circulation, it is going to reach first here and then some amount of drug, and ultimately from here we can say this is your systemic circulation. So when we are giving the drug by the IV route, so you're directly entering into the systemic circulation. But what happens when you give the drug by the oral route, which is because the first pass metabolism is more important than the oral route. So when you give a drug by the oral route, so this drug will enter here and then it will get absorbed into the portal circulation. Then it enters into the liver, and in the liver some amount of the drug will be metabolized and some other fraction of the drug will be going here. So whatever drug has been metabolized here, because it is of no use, it is wasted now, this is called as your first pass metabolism. And that's highest with oral, followed by the rectal routes. So therefore there will be, bioavailability will never be maximum, never be equal to the IV route. And we don't know actually how much drug has been metabolized, so it will be variable. So coming to this option here, IV route. IV route is the gold standard because all the drug is entering into your systemic circulation. There is no wastage. So the maximum bioavailability, that is 100%. So in fraction it will be 1. So like 100 by 100, right? How much it is? 1. So it is 1. Now intramuscular subcutaneous. Now it is given into the muscles or into the subcutaneous route. It is not entering directly into the systemic circulation, though it has very high bioavailability, right? But it will never be equal to IV, right? So it will be slightly less than the IV. So it will be somewhere around 0.75 to 1. But usually never like 1. Now oral route has variable bioavailability. Rather, even 1, I'm saying it is not possible usually to get 1. So it will be always less than 1 actually. It will be always less than 1, but it can be as low as 50% to 60%. So depending on drug to drug, that will be the answer here. So oral would be somewhere varying in between. So even if you talk about the rectal route, it will also vary somewhere here. None of them will be equal to 1. Then there are other routes like if you talk about sublingual, inhalational, right? So all of them, they are rapidly absorbed. They enter into the systemic circulation. They don't undergo first pass metabolism. But still, however, it is exactly 1. None of them have exactly 1 as a bioavailability. So if we go back to this here, so the best possible answer would be what? IV is 1. That is definitely correct. But is like oral 75% to 1? No, it is too high. It can be from 50 to 1. So this is a wrong one. While for intramuscular and subcutaneous, they can range from 0.75 to 1. So A, C and D. So which is the option which gives us the A, C and D? And that is this one, right? So out of this, the best possible answer for us is A, C and D. So here, another important thing is you have to know about the first pass metabolism. First pass metabolism is important because for oral route or rectal route, this matters. So because drugs which have very high first pass metabolism, you either have to give them at a very high dose, or for some it is not possible to give them for a very high dose because the side effects and won't be effective. So you have to change the route altogether. So there are certain drugs which have very high first pass metabolism. First pass metabolism. So when you give very high first pass metabolism, which are these drugs? So we drugs have propranolol, salbutamol, morphine, lidocaine, testosterone, hydrocortisone and your nitrate. So all of them, they have very high first pass metabolism. So this is also asked sometimes, which are the drugs which have high first pass metabolism? You should be knowing about these examples, right? Okay, so moving on to the next one. So moving on to the next question is, a female patient who is on oral contraceptive pills has been diagnosed with tuberculosis and started on anti-tubercular therapy. She was advised to use an additional barrier method of contraception. So what is the rationale behind this recommendation, right? So whether OCPs have teratogenic effects, ATT may become ineffective, rifampicin reduces the metabolism of OCPs, or rifampicin enhances OCP metabolism leading to contraceptive failure. So here, there are things to mark. So she's on oral contraceptive pills. She has been started on ATT and she was advised additional barrier method of contraception, meaning that the OCPs are not going to be effective from now. So why do we think that OCPs are not going to be effective now onwards? So there must be something that ATT is doing to these OCPs. So whether OCPs have teratogenic effects. So see, OCPs do not have any documented teratogenic effects. We don't use them once there is pregnancy in many cases because it can have some hormonal effects, but not any teratogenic effects. ADT may become ineffective. Again, this is a wrong answer because ADT it doesn't have any direct interaction like OCPs cannot make the ADT ineffective. Now we'll see for the C and D. Rifampicin reduces the metabolism of OCPs. If it reduces the metabolism of OCPs, that means that the OCP levels are going to be higher. Then why would she need to use another method of contraception? While rifampicin enhances OCP metabolism, now leading to contraceptive failure. So let's see that is this the cause? Because this makes sense because it is leading to contraceptive failure. That's why the doctor is advising the patient to have additional method of contraception. Now let's see why. So this is the correct answer here, and let's deep dive further into it. what it does is, now see, rifampicin is a very potent enzyme inducer. Which enzymes are we talking about here? We are talking about the CYP enzyme. So it's a very potent enzyme inducer. So when potent enzyme inducers are given with the other drugs whose metabolism they affect, then what happens? So let's say OCP patient was taking initially, and it is an everyday pill, right? So one pill every day. So why one pill every day? Because this OCP, let's say, was getting metabolized in a period of 24 hours, and the next dose would be given after 24 hours. So the female is protected. Now she has tuberculosis, and the doctor adds on rifampicin. So what is now rifampicin doing? It is increasing the metabolism, because CYP enzyme is involved here. So it is increasing the metabolism. So inducing the metabolism of CYP. So now OCPs are getting metabolized faster. So now OCPs are getting metabolized in, let's say, only 12 hours. Right? So they are getting metabolized only in 12 hours. So what happens if it is getting metabolized in 12 hours now? See, the problem would be that now this OCP is no longer going to be effective, because for the next 12 hours, what is going to happen for the next 12 hours? For the next 12 hours now, the patient is going to be patient is not going to have any effect of the OCPs, right? The patient is not going to have any effect of the OCPs. So now what is going to happen? Next 12 hours, there is no protection at all, because the OCP has got metabolized here. Faster metabolism. So within 12 hours, OCP has metabolized. Next 12 hours, no protection. So what is advised now here? That there should be additional barrier method, because otherwise there will be unwanted pregnancy here. So barrier method is advised here. That is the reason. So the correct answer, it is an enzyme inducer, rifampicin, and therefore leading to contraceptive failure. So any drug which is an enzyme inducer, and you get the same kind of question like with OCPs or with other drugs whose efficacy is being decreased. So you just have to know that these are potent enzyme inducers, and whenever you give another drug with an enzyme inducer, you have to increase the dose of the other drug. Right? That is the thing here. Now, a similar kind of question. A patient taking digoxin, potassium chloride, clarithromycin, atenolol. So how many drugs? Digoxin, potassium chloride, clarithromycin, atenolol, and triamterene. So they develop, or the patient has developed, atrial fibrillation now. With a controlled ventricular rate, lab tests reveal elevated serum digoxin levels. Which of the following medications is most likely responsible for this increase? Whether it is potassium chloride, clarithromycin, atenolol, triamterene. Now, you know digoxin, it is given for heart failure. And remember one thing, digoxin's relationship with potassium. Whenever there is low potassium in the body, hypokalemia, it is going to increase the toxicity of digoxin. But when there is hyperkalemia, it is going to decrease the toxicity of digoxin. So this is one very important relation that we should know. So we will see what is happening. That is one point. And number two, digoxin gets excreted with the help of a P-glycoprotein. So elimination. So the renal clearance of digoxin is primarily because of the P-glycoprotein. Now let's see if any of these drugs is affecting any of these metabolism or this P-glycoprotein. Let's say if they have an effect. Now potassium chloride. Potassium chloride increases potassium. So I told you that increased potassium chloride or potassium in the body is going to decrease the toxicity. So we can rule out potassium chloride. It has not increased the serum digoxin levels. Then next is clarithromycin. Clarithromycin, it's an antibiotic, but what important thing we should know about clarithromycin? Now, clarithromycin is a drug which is also an enzyme inhibitor. So it's an enzyme inhibitor. Again, which enzyme is inhibited? CYP. So it inhibits the CYP enzymes. That is one. So digoxin's metabolism is getting affected here. So digoxin is being metabolized by CYP, right? But if you are giving a enzyme inhibitor here, then digoxin is not going to get metabolized as fast as it was going. So the levels of digoxin are going to be high. So it can lead to toxicity. Number two is not only this. Not only it is doing this, it is also a P-glycoprotein inhibitor. What is P-glycoprotein doing? So P-glycoprotein, let's say this is a cell. Now this P-glycoprotein is causing the clearance of digoxin. But if you are inhibiting this P-glycoprotein, digoxin is not going to be cleared from the body. It's going to be retained. So increase in the serum levels of digoxin. So by both these methods, number one and number two, clarithromycin is increasing the levels of digoxin in the body. So your correct answer here is clarithromycin. Why? Because it is a CYP inhibitor as well as a P-glycoprotein inhibitor. So very important point to note. Now, we'll also go to the second and third and the fourth option. Let's see why they're not the correct answers. Because atenolol, what is atenolol? Atenolol is a beta blocker. So beta blocker as such, they have no such direct interaction with digoxin, either the metabolism or the clearance. So beta blockers are going to act on the heart. So they're going to decrease the heart rate and AV conduction. But as such, there's no direct interaction with this digoxin. Similarly, triamterene, which is, what is triamterene? Triamterene is a drug which is a potassium sparing, diuretic. Again, it has no direct interaction with this particular drug. So these belongs to the drug. So no direct interaction, right? So they can increase the potassium level in the body. Again, it will not cause toxicity with digoxin. That is the primary thing here. So your correct option is clarithromycin. So with these two questions, we have come to an important topic about enzyme inducers and an enzyme inhibitors. So let's see what are the important inducers and the inhibitors, because such questions have been repeatedly asked. So you should be well versed with the certain important ones, not all, but mainly the important ones. So enzyme inducers, you can remember a mnemonic, which is GPRS cell phone. So GPRS, G is griseofulvin, phenytoin, rifampicin, smoking, carbamazepine, and phenobarbital. So these are potent enzyme inducers. So any drug which is given along with this drug, you have to increase the dose of the other drug because it can cause therapeutic failure of the drug. On the other hand, enzyme inhibitors, you remember the mnemonic, which is sick of age, right? So this is sick of age. Sodium valproate, INH, isoniazid, cimeridine, ciprofloxacin, okay? And here you can also write this drug, which is clarithromycin. Clarithromycin. Ketoconazole, omeprazole, fluconazole, alcohol. Acute intake of alcohol works as enzyme inhibitor, but chronic alcohol use, remember, chronic alcohol use, that is functioning as a enzyme inducer. Then grapefruit juice, erythromycin. So erythromycin, macrolide, clarithromycin, so they belong to the same class. So therefore, this class of drugs, they are your enzyme inhibitors. So these are your important mnemonics, and you must remember these enzyme inducers and these enzyme inhibitors. Certain few points I would like to mention here. Most of the anti-epileptic drugs, they are enzyme inducers. Exception is your sodium valproate. So another question, all of these anti-epileptics are enzyme inducers except, so that will be your valproate. So similarly, which anti-TB drug is an enzyme inhibitor? That is your isoniazid. That is another important question. So you will be asked drug interactions. So similarly, there was another question which was asked, if you give erythromycin with a drug called as estemizole, or you can give terfenadine, right? So both of them, terfenadine, they're antihistamine. So what happened is, like normally estemizole, terfenadine, when it is given, they have a tendency to cause Torsades D pointus, longitudinal Torsades D pointus. But what happens is, when you give erythromycin with this drug, it is going to inhibit the metabolism of these drugs and further increase the drug levels in the blood. So it will increase this toxicity and patient will have this dangerous Torsades D pointus. That's why now estemizole, terfenadine, they're banned drugs, no longer available. But this is often asked in the also exam. One of the questions was that which of the drugs have increased its levels of the patient developed Torsades D pointus. So what could be the cause, which drug? So any of this enzyme inhibitor, when they're combined with this sort of drugs, they can cause this kind of problem, that is Torsades D pointus. So anything else also which I want to highlight here is, yes, one more thing I want to highlight here is there are certain drugs which are metabolized by a process called as acetylation. Acetylation. Okay, so acetylation, we have shipped drugs. SHIPD, shipped drugs, because sometimes asked acetylation. So what happens is that they can lead to drug-induced, the SLE can be there as a side effect. But which are the following drugs that can be metabolized by acetylation? These are your shipped drugs. So in S, we have sulfonamides. H stands for hydralazine. I stands for isoniazid. P stands for prokenamide. And even PAS. And D stands for Dapso. So these are the drugs which are metabolized by acetylation. So they're called as shipped drugs, that you can also remember. Moving on to the next one. Lidocaine is used in a loading dose for the treatment of arrhythmias. The loading dose of the drug is determined by which of the following pharmacokinetic parameters. So again, it's a formula-based question that you should be remembering. So then it will be easy to answer such questions. Right? So loading dose, let's see what is the formula for the loading dose. Now, loading dose is equal to volume of distribution multiplied by the desired plasma concentration. So remember this, that loading dose depends on the volume of distribution. How to remember? Loading has D in its spelling, volume of distribution has D in its spelling. So loading dose depends on the volume of distribution. I want to actually separate loading dose and maintenance dose here, or the dosing rate that we calculate. Now, that depends upon the clearance, right? Multiplied by the plasma concentration. So the difference only is in these two variables, and how to identify to avoid getting confused. Just remember this simple trick, that your loading dose has D in the spelling, so has the volume of distribution. So volume of distribution, loading dose will depend on, right? So lidocaine actually has a high volume of distribution. So it gets distributed into the various tissues and such. So you need a higher dose for getting the effect. When usually loading dose is required, so for example, drugs which have very high volume of distribution, or you can say the drugs have very high long half-lives, and you want to give it in emergencies. You can't wait for half-lives, like digoxin half-life of 40 hours or so. So when you give it in emergency, you want the action immediately. 40 hours, you know that 4 to 5 half-lives are required for a drug to achieve steady state levels. That is the plasma concentration. You can't wait for 4 to 5 half-lives. For digoxin, for example, 40 into 5, 200 hours. No, not possible. So what you do? You give those doses collectively in one go. So this is called as the loading. You're loading the patient so that your steady state or the desired therapeutic concentrations are achieved immediately. So we can do with this. For lidocaine, the reason it has got very high volume of distribution. So you have to give a larger dose so that it takes into account the distribution into the tissues, and then it will achieve its therapeutic plasma concentration. So there can be so many reasons for it. So lidocaine, you remember this one. So here the answer is, we are talking about loading dose. So it is determined by which? So I told you the formula for loading dose. You remember it depends on volume of distribution. So this would be the correct answer. It doesn't depend on the half-life, clearance, or the, so in clearance, it is usually your maintenance dose that depends on the clearance, but not the loading dose. Half-life is different altogether, right? And bioavailability, we just did the area under curve, and that is depending on, this is about the absorption. So this comes in under absorption and not under distribution as such, and loading dose has nothing to do here with it. Then these are the important things that we should know. That is, volume of distribution depends on various factors. If we go about this, what are the various factors? So there are, it depends on lipid solubility. Obviously, if the drug is more lipid soluble, it can easily get into the tissues and it can distribute fast. Then plasma protein binding, which is the most important factor here we are going to talk about. Then there are other factors like presence of barriers like blood-brain barrier, etc., tissue storage. You know, when drugs have very, very high volume of distribution, they get usually stored in the tissues. So we see that the volume of distribution is apparently very, very high. Then diseases can affect the volume of distribution as well. So let's focus mainly on the plasma protein binding, because this is the most likely question that is asked. Okay? So that is what we're going to do. So drugs with high apparent volume of distribution. I told you that drugs have very, very high volume of distribution. For example, I give you example of a drug like chloroquine. It has a very high volume of distribution. So let's say more than 13,000 liters. So do you think we have that much of plasma in us? No. Why it has so much of high volume distribution? Because it is getting stored in certain tissues. And the important organs where it gets stored is, one is your liver and the other is your eye in the retina. That's why if you give it for a long period of time, over a period of time, it can lead to a side effect or the adverse effect, which is called as bullseye retinopathy, right? So that is classically seen. Now, this is again a very important MCQ, that which of the drug causes this bullseye retinopathy, and only when you're using it for a very long, not for short courses, but very long period of time. So drugs with high AVD, that means they have distributed or they have stored into the tissues, right? So also we will see one thing, that plasma protein binding is always inversely proportional to the apparent volume of distribution. So if the drug is highly plasma protein bound, that is, it is a plasma, it is not getting distributed. So it will have low apparent volume of distribution. While if the drug is low plasma protein bound, then it has very high volume or large volume of distribution. So it has an inverse relationship with this. Now, coming to dialysis, another important thing. Now, dialysis. Now, what happens in dialysis is that, let's say there is poisoning or overdose with the drug, and this drug is present in the plasma, right? And there are plasma proteins. So some drug is bound with the plasma protein and the other drug is free, right? So when you are dialyzing the patient, or when you dialyze that, that tube is passed, the aim of that dialysis process is that you remove the offending drug from there. So when you put this pipe through it or this tubing through it, the offending drug needs to be removed. So which do you think is going to be removed? Because the drug which is bound to the plasma protein is too big, it cannot cross through this tubing. So only the free form of the drug will be able to be removed. So if there is poisoning and most of the drug is in free form, it is easy or makes sense to dialysis. But if there is poisoning with the drug which is highly plasma protein bound, it makes no sense to do dialysis, because that drug is not going to be removed through dialysis. So remember, if the plasma protein binding is high, then dialysis is not a good idea. It won't be successful. But if it is low, drug is in free form, then it is successful. Now, there are few important drugs for which the questions have been asked in the previous years, that which are the drugs for which dialysis is effective and which are the drugs where dialysis is not effective. So remember, for where dialysis is not effective, drugs for which the dialysis is not effective. So you can remember another mnemonic here, that is avoid dialysis, right? So A is for amphetamine, V is for verapamil, O is for opioids, I is for imipramine, D is for digoxin, and D is for diazepam, or you can remember your benzodiazepines as such. So they can't be removed easily by dialysis. On the other hand, the drugs where dialysis is, poisoning where dialysis is effective. So dialysis can be done. Again, the mnemonic MLA, T. MLA, T, right? M stands for methanol. I stands for lithium. A stands for aspirin. Even for alcohol we can do. And T stands for theophylline. So here the dialysis can be done. Now certain diseases which, where the plasma protein binding can vary. Now plasma proteins, mainly two important you should be knowing. So one is albumin, which binds the acidic drugs, and alpha-1 acid glycoprotein, which binds the basic drugs, right? So in case of diseases, let's say there is some liver disease or there is nephrotic syndrome. What happens? There is decrease in the albumin levels. So when albumin levels are low, that means the bound fraction will be low because albumin is not available for the drug to bind. So there will be increase in the free form of the drug. And that can lead to toxicity. On the other hand, there are certain diseases, for example, in myocardial infarction, where what happens, there is increase in the alpha-1 acid glycoproteins. Right? So here, increased binding will occur of the drugs. So you can say that there is decrease in the free form, so decrease in the effect of the drug. So that is, now nephrotic syndrome 1, it is important. Displacement reactions can occur. So one drug can displace the other from its plasma protein binding site, and they can lead to different drug interactions, especially important. So important is like salicylates. They can displace warfarin. So when warfarin is displaced, it increases the toxicity of warfarin. And that is bleeding, right? So even another important one is sulfonamides. Sulfonamides can displace bilirubin from the binding site, especially in the neonates. And this leads to conditions of bilirubin that can enter into the brain of that neonate, and it leads to a condition called as connectivus. So these are two important displacement reactions which you should be knowing. Then these are some other important formulas that can be asked, or they have been asked in the previous question papers, but these are ones you should be knowing. So volume of distribution as such, what is the definition, or the formula is amount or dose of the drug when you give divided by the plasma concentration. So if it is an oral drug, then bioavailability also will come into the factor. IV drug, bioavailability is 1, the answer will not be affected. Half-life, this is 0.693 into volume of distribution divided by clearance, or this is a elimination constant, we can replace with this. But I think advisable would be to remember this, because there is an MCQ which was asked where there was volume of distribution given and the clearance was given, and you were asked to calculate the half-life of drug. So this is how you can put it. Loading dose we just discussed, and I told you maintenance dose. You have to just, there is a confusion between the maintenance and the loading dose, that on which the volume of distribution is there and where there is loading dose. So that only you have to be clear about. I told you the trick that D and D should be your checkpoint, or you should just identify this. There is a D in the spelling, right? Okay. Next. A patient receiving digoxin therapy develops side effects including nausea and vomiting, and the serum digoxin levels is measured at 4 milligrams per deciliter. while the therapeutic range of this drug is 1 milligram. So it is way above the therapeutic range. Now, half-life is given to you, that is 40 hours. How long should the physician wait before resuming treatment to allow the serum digoxin concentration to reach a therapeutic range? So basically what they're asking is that the level of digoxin is 4. Now you want to bring it to 1. So how much time will it take for digoxin to go from 4 milligrams to 1 milligram? And they have given you half-life. So they have given you a hint that you have to put half-life into action here. So what can we do here? We can calculate half-life. So see, 4 milligrams is the original plasma concentration, or currently it is a concentration. Now, half-life means when the plasma concentration goes to 1/2 of this. So half of 4 milligrams would be 2 milligrams per deciliter. And it takes 1 half-life. Half-life is 40 hours. Second half-life, it will again go down by 50%. So from 2, it will go to 1 milligram per deciliter. Again, half-life is 40 hours. So you calculate how much? 40 plus 40. So it has taken 80 hours for the drug to reach to its therapeutic range, which is 1 milligram per deciliter. So the correct answer here is 80 hours, right? So this is how we calculate that how. So it's very simple, but sometimes, it happens that there is so much information and you think it's a very difficult MCQ. But sometimes the MCQs can be very simple. You just have to relax and apply your mind here. Now half-life, as I said, what is half-life? It is time required to make the plasma concentration 50%. So to half the time it is taken for the concentration to reach to its half. So this is a concentration here. So the 50% would be here. Somewhat this is the half-life of the drug. And the formula I've told you it is important. Sometimes we have to apply that formula. Now, to achieve a steady state concentration, and this is an important question, how many half-lives are required? So about 4 to 5 half-lives are required by a drug to reach its steady state concentration, right? So for steady state. So this is an important question. And there was once a question asked, like, on what parameter does a steady state concentration depend? So it depends upon half-life of a drug. So it takes 4 to 5 hours to reach its steady state levels. On the other hand, it takes exactly 4 to 5 hours also for the drug to be around 97% eliminated from the body. So in both cases, whether it is rising in the body or in the plasma, or it is going down or decreasing the concentration. So in both cases, 4 to 5 half-lives are required. So we'll see how this happens. See, if initially the concentration of drug was 100, then from 100 to in 1 half-life, let's say 1 hour or 1 half-life, it goes to 50. Then another, it will go to 25. Then another 1 hour or 1 half-life, how much? It is 12.5. Then another half-life, it is 6.25. Then another half-life, it is 3.125. So you see how much this is. I'm talking about the elimination. So here 100 may say it was like 50% of the drug has gone. Now here 50 plus 25, which is 75% of the drug has been eliminated. So here it is 75 plus 12.5. So 87.5% of the drug has been eliminated. Now here it is 87.5 plus 6.25. So this is 93.75% of the drug has been eliminated. Now here it is 93.75 plus 3.125. So how much it is? Approximately 97%. Right? So 97, how much it took? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 5. Right? So approximately it took about 4 to 5 half-lives, about 5 half-lives for the drug to go. So options, how many half-lives are required? So if the option is 2, 3, 4, 5, you will always go with this option. Okay? The nearest option. As you go further in the 6th half-life, more drug is going to be eliminated. So completely, almost eliminated if that is the option, whether in 3 to 4 whether in 4 to 5, whether in 5 to 6, or none of the above. You will always go with the maximum half-lives in the option. So this is the two important points. So 4 to 5 half-lives for reaching the steady state, and our 4 to 5 half-lives are also required for about 97 to 98% of the drug to be eliminated from the body, right? Then half-life comes into picture here also. So this is another very, very important concept about the zero order and the first order kinetics. So what is important about this? See, zero order kinetics, first order kinetics. First order kinetics are good kinetics. Everybody wants to come first. Zero order are not considered to be good. So because here the enzyme gets saturated and there are more chances of toxicity here. So zero order kinetics is that drug elimination occurred as a constant rate independent of the plasma concentration. That is here, the point here. While here it is proportional to the plasma concentration. So if the plasma concentration is high, the elimination will be proportional to that. But in zero order, it doesn't bother. Even if the plasma concentration is high, it will work at its own pace, right? So that is a problem because then the toxicity chances are much more. So another difference, fixed amount of drug is eliminated per unit time. It is the amount of the drug. While here a fixed fraction of the drug is eliminated in the unit time. So for example here 50% will be eliminated per hour. Here we can say 50 milligrams will be eliminated per hour. That's the difference. 50%, 50 milligrams. You see what is the difference here? Let's say the drug is 200 milligrams in both the cases, whether it is zero order or whether it is first order. So this is the first order. This is the zero order. In first order, 50% every hour, right? So in 1 hour, it will be 100. In another 1 hour, 50% would be 50. In another 1 hour, 50% would be 25. In another 1 hour, 50% will be 12.5, and so on and so forth. While zero order, 1 hour, it is 50 milligrams, not 50%, but it is 50 milligrams in 1 hour. So in 1 hour, it is 150. In another 1 hour, it is 100. In another 1 hour, it is 50, right? In another 1 hour, it is 0. See the difference? That is 50% and that is 50 milligrams of the drug. Right? So it is this. Now, in zero order kinetics, basically, why it happens that even if you increase the dose of the drug, it will only stay 50 milligrams per hour because that is why, because the enzymes, they get saturated. There's no more enzyme present to metabolize the drug. So, first order mein, there is no saturation. That's why if you go on increasing the dose of the drug, then accordingly, the rate of elimination will be faster. So if you want, see here, I can show you by example. Let's see here. See, very important. So here you're seeing first order kinetics. If you talk about the half-life, let's see what is happening to the half-life. So in first order, every 1 hour, the drug is reducing to 50% of the original concentration. So here the half-life is 1 hour. It is staying constant. Let's see what is the half-life here. Here from 200 to 100, it took how much? 2 hours. From 100 to 50, it took 1 hour. So do you think the half-life is constant? No, the half-life doesn't remain constant here, right? So that is the difference. So half-life will always remain constant in first order, but it will be variable when we are talking about zero order kinetics. So if you increase the dose, again the half-life will vary. Now examples. Now we don't need to remember the examples of first order because most of the drugs, they follow first order kinetics. So general things we don't remember. We only remember the exceptions to the rule. So examples of drugs which are following zero order, that you should be aware of. So you can remember with another mnemonic, that is zero. Zero means zero kinetics. 0 watt power. So W is for warfarin. A is for alcohol. T is for theophylline. Another T is for tolbutamide, and P here is for phenytoin. Now, phenytoin actually follows a mixed order kinetics, which means that when you give it in a therapeutic dose, it follows first order. But as soon as you go on increasing the dose, then it follows zero order, right? Saturation kinetics. So therefore, it follows mixed order. Completely or purely zero order, it is your alcohol, right? This is very, very important. Right. Now, the next question is, for toxicity of which of the following drugs is urinary alkalization most useful, right? So, here, now remember this. What is this term? Urinary alkalinization. That means we are making the urine more alkaline. Now, this is the concept where you should remember. Why do you want to make the urine alkaline? Because there is overdose of a particular drug and you want to remove it through the urine. Here, let's first go to the concept and then I'll come back to this question. What is the effect of pH? Effect of pH on absorption or excretion. Excretion, we are more interested, like, we know that drug can get reabsorbed into the body, right, from the kidneys. So if, see, this is a drug which gets first excreted or secreted, and then there is a possibility here that whatever drug was here, it comes back into the body through reabsorption. Now, remember the rule here. Let's rule is acidic drugs are better absorbed in acidic media. Basic drugs are better absorbed in basic media. First rule. So, acidic drug, they are absorbed in acidic media. Basic drug are absorbed in basic media. Second rule. Acidic drugs are excreted in the basic media, while the basic drugs are excreted in the acidic media. Alright, so here acidic drugs are excreted in the basic media, basic drugs are excreted in the acidic media. So this is the rule. A, B, B is for absorption. For excretion, it should be A, B, B, A. So you want to increase this. Now let's say here the drug is A, which is your acidic drug, and you know that urine is usually slightly acidic. So acidic drug in acidic media, which rule is going to follow? It is going to be absorbed. So absorption here means reabsorption. So it is going to come back into the body. And let's say you have a poisoning with this drug, you want to remove it from the body and not make it come back into the body. So here you want to remove it from the body. So what rule should you follow here? Actually this one. So if you want to excrete the drug, you should make the urine alkaline. Right? So for urinary alkalization, for the drug to be removed, it should be an acidic drug. And if the reverse is there, let's say the drug is basic, then you can make the urine even more acidic to help in this. Now, this process of this, acidic drug in basic media, why it is happening? Because when acidic drug goes into the basic medium, acidic and basic. So when acidic drug goes into the basic medium, it gets ionized. An ionized form of a drug cannot be absorbed. And this is called as ion trapping. Right? So ionized fractions are not absorbed. Unionized fractions are better absorbed. So therefore, when acidic drug enters into the basic medium, it will become ionized. So it will not be able to come back into the body by the process of reabsorption. So this is called as ion trapping. So here the question is that you are making the urine alkaline. So therefore, if you want to excrete that drug, the drug needs to be acidic in nature. So your job here is now to simply identify the drug which has acidic nature. So out of these, which of the drug has acidic nature? It is your aspirin. So aspirin is an acidic drug, acetyl salicylic acid, and it can get excreted if you make the urine more alkaline. So let's see what about the other drugs. Beta blockers, in case there is overdose, we have antidotes available. Like for beta blockers, we have glucagon. For calcium channel blocker, you can give IV calcium gluconate. For acetaminophen or paracetamol, what you do? You have N-acetyl. Right, so you already have antidotes available for these poisoning. For aspirin, the best thing would be that you do alkalization of the urine. So there is this chart for you to remember which are the most often asked, most important drugs which are acidic in nature and the basic one. So important ones which have been asked previously, we should know them: aspirin, phenobarbital, acetazolamide, phenytoin, warfarin. So these are your acidic drugs. So whenever the question will come from one of these drugs, you have to make the urine alkaline. And what do we do here? How do we make the urine alkaline? You just give IV sodium bicarbonate. Right? So this is how also the question can be asked. The second one is the basic drugs, which are your basic drugs. Most of the drugs are going to end with ene or ine, except this diazepam. So all of them are basic drugs. So what you need to do here is you have to make the urine more acidic. So acidic may you can add ammonium chloride, or you can give ascorbic acid or vitamin C. That is what you have to do, right? Then, as a medical practitioner, what is the correct way to prescribe alprazolam to a patient? So these are different prescription methods that are given to you. So standard is, see, you follow certain rules. So first, let's come to the rules, the guidelines. Always use generic names, and you have to avoid the abbreviations. Check if there are abbreviations given, because every patient will not be able to understand. So you have to check on that. Mention the dosage, frequency, duration to prevent any kind of errors. Ensure it is legible, and check for drug interactions. Avoid unnecessary polypharmacy. So here, if you see what is the error in most of these options is that they are giving you abbreviations. So the only option where abbreviation is not present, it is actually your last. So this would be the correct answer. So we don't use terms like half mg, no, 0.5 mg can still be tolerable, but you always have to write once daily, at bedtime, twice daily. So this is the fallacy here in these three options, and last option is the correct. So this has been asked. So what is the correct way of the prescription format? So right. So with this, we come to the end of this revision on pharmacokinetics, where I have dealt with all the important topics which have been previously asked in the exam. Thank you.